Well, here we are again, Robby. It was really fun to see the impact of you specifically and your organization across the whole entire NFT industry. The things that your team and all the portfolio companies have accomplished is nothing short of inspirational and has set a tone for what others can kind of follow. And if people really understand the story, it is quite something that has been accomplished. For those that may not know who you are and all the things that you're involved in, can you please introduce yourself, and then we'll have a fun conversation
Sure.
again.
No problem. Hi, I'm Robby Young. I'm the CEO of Animoca Brands. We make games, focus on just blockchain games specifically. And we also make a lot of investments. So some of the games that you may know, products like the Sandbox or MotoGP Ignition or Phantom Galaxies, Arc 8 by Gamey. These are all within our portfolio of studios. And we also do a lot of strategic investing off our balance sheet. So we've invested in probably a couple hundred businesses across Web3 by now. And we're big, fans of the open metaverse and supporters of the ecosystem.
One of the things that people have been waiting for is kind of AAA games to come into this space. And that's something that you and I were talking about for a moment. Can you share the anticipation and hope, the recent developments, and what you see coming with kind of the type of games that people are used to playing outside of our Web3 ecosystem?
Sure. I think one of the things that we're trying to do is we're always trying to push the envelope as to, innovative business models, content types, just ways to think creatively about how we can leverage blockchain in what we do in making games. And one of the titles we have that I'm quite excited about, which we've launched in early access and now beta, and it's, there's a public beta out there, is Phantom Galaxies. And this comes from our Blowfish studio in Australia. And it's a fantastic, you don't have to be crazy about transforming robots, having mech wars in space to love the game. It's got incredible graphics. It's a real, AAA experience, and something that I think we haven't seen in a blockchain game with a tokenized economy before.
Something that you and I also were talking about is just some of the acquisitions that maybe are outside of just gaming an established game, like the two organizations that were announced recently from France. Do you want to talk a bit about not just that, but the fact that people don't always comprehend that, as you mentioned, you've made hundreds of investments off your balance sheet, you've built a massive portfolio, and it's not just Sandbox and their competitors. It's very broad in terms of the folks that you are supporting and partnering with.
Sure. So we just announced two acquisitions actually in the last week of studios, coincidentally both in France. One's called Darewise, which is a AAA studio formed by a lot of executives, that come from the AAA console business, and they're creating a game called Life Beyond, which is very exciting. You should check it out. Again, I think a graphic quality that is much more akin to something people would be familiar with on other platforms. And then we also have Eden Games, which we acquired, and they're probably, arguably the best racing studio, and they create racing games across all platforms. They're currently creating the F1 mobile game on mobile, as well as they've created games for the Need for Speed franchise and Gear Club and things like that. So I think that for us, because we already have the Rev ecosystem with MotoGP and Formula E, it's exciting to bring in more racing studios like Eden, and also Grease Monkey Games, which we acquired last summer, that focuses on drifting, because we really want to grow out that ecosystem around this idea that Rev is a token for people who love motorsports and cars and motorcycles and anything that runs on wheels.
Would you mind sharing a little bit about the story of how the organization went from infancy and in many regards kind of bouncing around, finding its way to this explosive growth that you had and all these acquisitions? Because without that background, people may not understand, the narrative, which I think the narrative is important because of the impact that you and all the portfolio companies that you have, have inside the metaverse and the NFT space. So maybe you can give a little bit of kind of the story that people might not be aware of.
So I think we started in 2009 as a free-to-play casual games studio on mobile. Back in the early days of iOS, when it was just iOS and the App Store had just launched. And I think that's an important part of the thematic, because one of the things that I think has defined us as a company has been we like to be first and we like to be early when there are changes in technology. So we were early on iOS, we were early adopters of Android, we were early adopters of subscription business models, et cetera. We're always experimenting. And one of those experiments we did at the end of 2017 in partnership with what's now called Dapper Labs. And this was helping them to publish CryptoKitties in Greater China. And that was for us an experiment in this idea of what would it be like to put blockchain into a game. And I think it was that experiment that led us basically, kind of a straight line to where we are now, of thinking about just what seems like a logical progression of everything that we'd done in games before. This idea of being able to grant digital property rights to gamers just seems like a no-brainer. You can't unsee it or unthink it, if you will. And so we've just really devoted the last 4 years into thinking about the best way to build communities around the idea that there is going to be true ownership amongst the players of these environments that we create, whether you call them games or metaverses or what have you.
I've been speaking a lot at events. I helped co-produce all the Metaverse talks at CES in January because everybody didn't want to go because everybody was going to get sick. And of course, I got COVID from that. And I've been speaking at events outside of the traditional NFT space. One of the things that I've talked about most is the tension between what is considered the decentralized open metaverse world. Let's put Sandbox in there, and the centralized kind of web 2.5-ish approach that Meta has with Horizon. And of course, Horizon has lots of collaborators, right? You have NVIDIA with Omniverse. And of course, Sandbox has Decentraland and all the different people that are kind of approaching that. And one of my concerns has been that these people in this space think they're the Rebel Alliance and that these trillion-dollar market cap companies are the evil empire. And my proposal is, well, we probably should collaborate and work together. And so what is your perspective on having collaboration across these different ecosystems? Because obviously your portfolio companies are not going to be creating their own hardware. They're going to depend on the hardware of these massive companies. So being in conflict with one another may not be as good as being collaborative. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, if you don't mind sharing.
So just the fact that you proposed collaboration shows you're part of the Rebel Alliance. So I think, that we wear our biases on our sleeves. I think, to me, the difference between a game or an application or a social network and the metaverse is openness by definition. I think the idea that you create an experience, call it a platform, call it what you will, but an experience that is open to collaborating and sharing and interoperating with other experiences, that makes you part of the metaverse. And if at any point you decide that needs to be gated or ring fenced, then I don't think you're part of the metaverse anymore. And I think I like to keep the definition relatively simple there, because experiences are very different. They can be text-based, they can be, VR, they can be all kinds of different experiences, because community is built in many different ways. People love to play Magic the Gathering, and it's a card game, basically. But you can't tell me there's not a community out there that likes Magic the Gathering. So people coalesce around all different kinds of platforms, but I think it's the openness and the sharing that characterize them. So from our perspective, on the Rebel Alliance side, we're completely open to working with all those other platforms, and we try to encourage them to be open, because we think that ultimately it's to the benefit of everybody to embrace this idea of openness and interoperability, because it will ultimately enlarge the pie so that everybody benefits. And it's not about being afraid of, losing existing users or existing revenues. Yes, there may be a little dip for a moment, but when the pie gets bigger and you can prove your value as you have in the past, then there's no reason that your business shouldn't grow when the pie grows.
I think organizations like Animoca Brands and the portfolio companies that you're supporting, especially the organizations that are exploding in growth, like the Sandboxes of the world, and of course there's many. I think it's not just a growing pie. I believe it's that pie is being stacked on top of each other. So there once was a pie, everybody's fighting for their slice, and now there's 5 or 55,000 pies, and it's just an expansion. And part of that is empowering the community, right? So if you're now playing to earn, or if you're now playing to own, or if now what you create is in a sense kind of partially or fully your own intellectual property, it does change the whole conversation. One of the things that we're focused on at NFT.NYC this year is diversity, specifically diversity of projects, of utility, of approach. And so what diversity are you currently seeing in your portfolio companies that is standing out to you like, wow, I didn't really expect that, but that's brilliant. What a great, unique approach. I just love to get kind of a state of the union in a sense of what you see that's diverse and different than what's just been the rhythm over the last year or so.
Sure. I think it's interesting because the more people come into the space as developers and creators, the more diversity we see of different people's approaches to actually trying to find solutions to the same problems, or trying to find ways in which to develop, to create an MMO game, right? And if you come at it from a traditional console or PC web point of view, or you come to it from a DeFi degen point of view, you'll build a very different game, even though you may both love playing the same traditional console MMOs. But when you think about how to design a game and what turns you on about a game, that will be rooted in your own personal experiences. And so I think we see a lot of diversity of that, which is exciting. And at the same time, I think we're also seeing a lot of ambition. I love it. That's one of the things I see about this space. So I continue to see people proposing to me that they're building new L1 chains all the time. And that's one of those things that is a hard business. And there's a lot of big companies out there now already with relatively mature products. And yet people believe that they can build a better one, and they keep trying. And I think that's awesome.
I think that should sit for a second in some regards, because I really sometimes worry about people losing ambition and chasing after safety. Like, wow, this DAO is like safe. This membership, Proof Collective, as an example, is this PFP, Moonbirds, right? The new blue chip out of nowhere. It's the blue chip. And of course, hey, I get it. I've been, a huge fan and inspired by Kevin Rose and everything that he does. And I'm excited about that. But sometimes when there's a lot of success and a lot of money and a lot of infrastructure built, people kind of start to throw water on their fire, and they go, well, let's just do the safe thing. Like, this is working. How do you and your executives at Animoca Brands foster ambition, not with those that see you as a prospect, they're trying to hit you up to get behind their new L1, but with the 100, 200 established companies in your portfolio? What are you doing, saying, acting on to kind of, foster this fire to keep burning inside of them, that they drive toward more ambition and harder and more challenging things?
So I think it's because as a company, we're quite mission driven. And one of the things that we really want to see is we want to see the creation of this open metaverse, and we want to see the world embrace blockchain. We want everybody to have a blockchain wallet and be able to take control of their digital identity and their digital stuff, and to be able to own it and do what they like with it. And that's a really big ambition, because what we're doing is we're going to remake the internet in its entirety by doing that. And I think that hopefully we can, foster that similar ambition in the companies that we invest in and our studios, in helping them to believe that they're playing a part in doing just that. Because if we can do that, then we've already seen great examples of how transformational that can be. And again, I'll go back to the age-old example of, think how many jobs Axie Infinity created during the pandemic, jobs that would never have existed before in an industry that didn't exist before. And, if that business went away tomorrow and they just left their legacy as having created 2 million jobs during a pandemic for people, I would be very proud of that, and I think that that shows that anything is possible, because who would have thought? I mean, they didn't think that was possible 6 months earlier. So I think that gives us all hope to fuel the ambition that yes, everybody is capable of creating greatness.
I really like how you honor different organizations and bring out the gold in what they've done. Thanks for doing that. I'm going to ask you to share a piece of advice with everybody based on what your intent is at NFT.NYC. And so let me frame it this way. At NFT.NYC this year, there's probably less emphasis for you and your executive team to do a bunch of biz dev. You're not going to be scrambling, doing 15 meetings a day, looking for new companies to invest in, as much as it's like, hey, here's one moment that we know that June 20th through 23rd, the majority of our portfolio companies, their teams, their partners, their communities are coming to one place. So let's take advantage of the fact that everybody's there, and let's gather together those that are already part of the portfolio. Because you have so many organizations, you're thinking through strategically, how do we gather these group of people and those group of people? So do you have any advice and counsel for other groups that maybe are investing, or other groups that need to collaborate and bring people together? How do you see a great execution of bringing people together in New York during NFT NYC, and how might others follow your lead in that regard?
Sure. So I think one of the things about this event, and other events like it, is there are opportunities for you to create community in a different way. And if there's one thing that people in Web3 know about, it's creating community. It's what we do. And so I think it's an opportunity for us to foster that community and strengthen those ties in a way that, is harder to do on Zoom, et cetera. And as odd as it sounds, even now my second NFT NYC, sort of during/post pandemic, I'll still be meeting people that I've worked with for a couple of years, most likely for the first time in person. And it's an opportunity to do that. And I think, one of those great tips, which I actually take the lead from other big companies in times past, is I recommend getting a slightly larger hotel room so you can have meetings there. It becomes handy in a big city with limited coffee shops and meeting spaces. But I think it's about figuring out how to have that serendipity and how to meet people and make those connections in person, because one of the things that I think we value even more now that we've been through a pandemic is that there is a qualitative difference to meeting in person. And while we can work effectively at a distance, coming together from time to time in person does have meaning. And so to take advantage of that.
I'm so glad I asked that question, because, I have booked large suites in the past, and then I forget why I need to do that at big events. And just for me personally, selfishly, I'm glad I asked the question so I can do that. But I think that's a really simple decision, right? It's not very costly. It's a little bit more money. It's a little more commitment, but then you have a place to gather your team or gather people together. Robby, really thankful that you as an individual and the organization, Animoca Brands, and all the portfolio companies that you support and serve are going to be part of NFT NYC this upcoming June 20th through the 23rd. Thanks for coming to speak. Thanks for being a sponsor. Certainly the whole entire NFT industry would not be the same without the success that your team has had. And our event wouldn't be the same if you did not choose to participate in the way that you do. So we're grateful, and I want to make sure that I communicate that to you both directly and publicly.
No, thank you. We're really pleased to just be a part of the wider family and to help, do our part.
Well, you certainly do. And we see that, we celebrate that with you. And for those that watch this conversation, glad that you tuned in. Thanks for your attention. We hope to see you as well in New York City.